Hello fellow humans, today I want to talk about the stats in World of Tanks Blitz. What do the numbers mean? What are all these different aspects of a vehicle about, and what is important? Starting off with the firepower, the three important statistics here are DPM, penetration, and alpha damage, and then also various shell types. AP tends to be the standard rounds, and standard rounds always have higher alpha damage and medium amounts of penetration. Premium shells like APCR and Heat do have higher penetration but do have less damage, and HE have very bad penetration but very high damage. There are exceptions like the Japanese vehicles or the British vehicles with their HESH rounds. Now, speaking of HESH, it doesn't go through walls. Neither does Heat, so be very careful there. Don't shoot Heat and HE at walls. It will not go through. What does go, though, is APCR, because it's the fastest shell that most of the time, because Wargaming just randomly decides the shell speeds these days. There used to be a convention where APC fast, Heat slow, but it doesn't really apply anymore, so be very careful, look it up yourself. But what you can't control is RNG, which applies plus minus 15% to any penetration and alpha damage that you fire, which is extremely annoying. But what is very simple is your reload time. The more often you can shoot, the better. Well, not really, because the higher your rate of fire, the lower your alpha damage tends to be. And that is not always optimal, because you have to peek a lot more times, which will expose yourself to the enemy, which isn't really that good. So ideally, for a great balanced vehicle, you want a good combination between alpha damage and reload time. A bit of both is best. Now that we have a gun, we also need to aim it at the enemy. And what is important here is, first of all, your aim time. That is the time it takes for your aiming circle to reach its lowest diameter, which means you're the most accurate. It's also called your dispersion. Now, your dispersion does increase while you're moving and turning your turret. So if you're trying to shoot, try to somewhat be stationary, ideally, or play a vehicle that has no movement dispersion, like a Leopard or an FV215B. Something that is very important is gun depression, because it determines how many positions you can actually play a vehicle from. However, on the other side, if you're playing a tank destroyer, you also have the angles left and right, which limits how far you can actually traverse your vehicle without moving. Speaking of moving, we kind of have to get around, do we? Now, something that's very important here is the power to weight ratio, because that determines your acceleration, how fast you can go. So that is a very, very important statistic right there. And another thing, if you are in combat, you want to have a good traverse speed. Because let's look at this quick comparison. The STB does traverse a lot quicker, so you're a lot easier to get your gun onto the target. And if you also, bonus tip, use the turret traverse at the same time as the hull traverse, it's a lot easier to get your gun onto the enemy. So try to learn that as quickly as possible, traverse both at the same time. Now, a very obscure statistic is terrain resistance. I don't even know how it properly works, because on the map, you can't actually see whether something is hard or soft ground. There is also water. Absolutely avoid driving in water at all costs. But essentially, on hard ground, you will be driving faster. And if you've gotten value out of this video so far, then don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. So now, well, we have a vehicle, we've moved around, we have some ability. Now we kind of want to find out where the enemies are. And what do we need for that? Well, we need some good old view range. And the only thing that is really is just a circle around your tank with how far you can see. It would be great if it'd be that easy, but there's camo rating, which should deserve a video of its own, but let's have a moment here. So if you're a light tank, your camo rating stays the same while you're driving and while you're stationary. If you're any other vehicle, your camo rating decreases massively when you're driving versus when you're stationary, which means if you're in a tank destroyer, remember the angle of your gun. If you're having to turn your hull in a tank destroyer, you're now going to have less camo rating, and you can be spotted simply by doing that. However, if you simply fire your gun, then your camo rating goes out the window anyway. But if you want to get your camo back, all you have to do is pull back into cover, be unseen by any enemy, and then look at the battle clock at the top of your screen, wait for 10 seconds, and then your camo rating has been entirely reset, and you should be unspotted, unless you are within a circle of 50 meters of the enemy tank, because then no matter how many houses there are between, you will always be detected by the enemy. And if that complexity does make you want to uninstall, we haven't even started with the armor yet. The armor functions in the garage are absolutely abysmal, because they do not show anything of value in most cases. They, for example, don't show things like cupolas, like weak spots that are just randomly there. They only show a basic armor figure number. They don't even include angling. They don't include spaced armor, which is armor outside of your armor that is especially useful against heat shells and HE shells because they explode on the outside armor and don't penetrate your actual armor. So basically, armor is a cluster frick of complexion that really is very hard to understand. But luckily, in World Tanks Blitz, there is that guide of if you have it red, you can't pen it. If it's gray, you can pen it, but you also sometimes can't pen it because remember, 15% RNG up and down. So armor is very complicated. And despite all of that already very complex stuff, we haven't even scratched the surface of everything that is possible and applicable in this game. Because remember, this is a strategy game. There are other modifiers in this game that have a large influence on your statistic, like your equipment, like for example the gimmicks, like special consumables that only certain vehicles have and other vehicles don't. And that is all things that if you do really want to get a good player, you will unfortunately eventually have to learn. And it does very much suck, and it is a process that does take a very long time. And obviously wargaming isn't making this any easier by introducing more gimmicks, more special consumables, more weird and random things that don't really make any sense. Or by, for example, we mentioned alpha damage being very important earlier. Usually you could simply look at a vehicle's caliber and be like, 105mm gun, that must have 350 alpha damage. But not even that is any longer true, because some of them now have 300 alpha damage, some have 360 alpha damage. So all in all, what you can learn from this video is that we're all fucked. Thank you very much for watching, and see you next one. Goodbye.